This Week in Startups is brought to you by Silicon Valley Bank. For over 35 years, Silicon Valley Bank has been providing banking and financial solutions for every stage of the startup journey. Learn more at svb.com/twist. Ourcrowd helps you invest early in pre-IPO companies alongside professional VCs. If you're interested in investing, you can join Ourcrowd for free at ourcrowd.com/twist. And Marketerhire. Need expert marketing help fast? Hire vetted marketing specialists this week from the company that's already used by Netflix, Allbirds, and more. Get $500 off your first hire at marketerhire.com/twist and use code TWIST.
All right, everybody. You asked for him. Here he is, Anatoly Yakovenko. Anatoly, did I get your name correct? Did I butcher it too bad?
Nailed it.
Perfect. Great. So Anatoly is the CEO of a little crypto project known as Solana, Solana. And it's caught fire. People cannot stop talking about it at my poker game. Everybody is really excited about the potential. And as a proxy for that, the price of Solana has gone up 90x, not 90%, 90 times since January 1st of 2020 from a buck and change, maybe $2 to $166 today, putting them as the 6th or 7th largest crypto project, depending on the day, blowing past Doge and XRP, and right behind the Ethereums and Bitcoins and Cardano and Tethers of the world. Tether, obviously a stablecoin. We'll see how long that sticks around. Welcome to the program, Anatoly.
Awesome to be here.
So you've got a long history in the technology business. You worked at Dropbox for a bit, working on their distributed systems, and you were an engineer at Qualcomm, and you had your own VoIP startup at the turn of the millennium. When did you first find out about crypto? And then how did you come up with the idea for Solana? And what is Solana's mission? A couple of questions there. Take them as you like.
Yeah. So early days for me in crypto were when BTC was just starting out. And I thought it was kind of silly. And it was the only way I was looking at it is, well, I could probably optimize the mining code and see if I can mine these things faster than anyone else. But things started moving so quickly by the time I thought, well, maybe I should do GPUs. Somebody was mining it, the GPUs already. By the time I thought maybe I could roll an FPGA, there was an ASIC already for sale. People were running a Kickstarter for sale. And my true experience with crypto was at Kickstarter. I forget the name of the company, but they basically built the system, but then mined BTC with it and didn't release the actual hardware to their users until they exhausted their advantage. And to me, that was like the quintessential crypto experience. Just don't trust anybody. But I was an engineer, and I looked at it strictly from kind of an engineering perspective and didn't really understand the monetary or social implications of it for a decade, I would say.
Yeah. So I think at the core of Solana's value proposition is that the transaction fees and the block times are going to be extremely low. Right now, I believe that your cost per transaction is, my gosh, it's like a thousandth of a penny or something crazy like that. Explain to people who are neophytes what this means in plain English, that the block times and the transaction costs are so low, especially when compared to, say, making a transaction with Bitcoin or Ethereum.
Yeah, Bitcoin can do I think 7 transactions per second theoretically. Ethereum, I think it depends on the gas capacity, but it's somewhere between 11 and 20, maybe 30 at most. But with Solana, you're not limited by block space. There isn't a limit that the network sets. It's purely the bandwidth available to the network. And bandwidth is plentiful. It's this thing that you can get, for $100 at home, you can get 1 gigabit of it in a lot of places.
Yeah.
And at a data center, when you sign up and put your box there, they give you 1 gigabit for free, because they really only care about when you go over that and you're trying to get 10 gigs or 20 gigs of bandwidth. So a network with 1 gigabit available to it globally should be able to fit, 500,000 of these things per second if the software doesn't suck. So since it takes 4 to 10 years to build one of these generic multi-purpose database operating system, any kind of complex system like this, we're 4 years in, I think we're like a factor of 10 off that theoretical.
So for people who don't understand these concepts, maybe you could help us with Solana being a proof of stake network versus, say, Bitcoin's proof of work network. What does this mean for folks?
So there's like how do you know when you're talking to somebody on the internet that it's not a bot, right? That it's not just like a bunch of troll farms from the old country or whatever that are all
you said it, not me.
Hey, that's where I was born. They're pretending to be somebody else. So in proof of work in Bitcoin, the way that they do this is you have to prove that you burned electricity somewhere. And that's how you prove that you are voting with something. And because electricity costs money, it's assumed that it's hard to get a lot of it. And that's where the security of the network comes from. In proof of stake, you're kind of trying to fake this by creating a virtual token, which ends up being the underlying token that you use for fees and everything else, that is used to prove that you're not faking these votes. And you do that with a signature from your cryptographic key. And long story short, you can think of it as it's no different than VeriSign, this long, certificate chaining that you see in old school web. That proves that you're talking to Google. Well, imagine if Google, instead of having 1 vote per certificate chain, they had 1 billion votes that they could spread out in different amounts to everybody else that's part of their Google certificate chain. And all of a sudden you can say, well, did 2/3 of Google agree on this thing?
Got it.
And that's really where proof of stake comes from. It's just a way to assign weights to a public key.
So when the Solana network was released, did people mine the coins, or were they just issued in the world?
They were issued much like VeriSign issues a bunch of stuff, like a bunch of certificates. So in that initial Genesis block, you had a bunch of validators, a bunch of early investors, and, foundation and labs and stuff like that. And once the network got running, part of building these totally open permissionless networks is socializing the cost of the operations. So who pays for the bandwidth? Who pays for the hardware? And spreading out that cost is you bake in some crypto economics is what they call it, but literally it's spam resistance. We have this token that represents a weight in the network. We want to make sure that people don't just flood the network with messages. They don't create too many validators that vote. And that token, its capacity, represents the limits of how far you can push the system. And also, participating in that system gives you that token with the hope that it's worth something for somebody to spam this, and therefore this thing has value.
So how many nodes, how many computers, I guess, would be a way to say it for folks out there. How many of those exist in the network? And then what does it cost to do that? And then what do they gain by being part of the network?
So on the network right now, the Solana mainnet beta, there is, if I can look correctly, I can check right now. It's about like 1,100 voting validators.
Okay.
On the testnet is like 2,200.
Who are those validators? What is their motivation? How does one become one?
So a bunch of these are volunteers, so to speak. They're people that want to earn tokens. So being a validator means you're running a box somewhere and somebody assigns you stake, or you self-assign yourself some stake. And those are the tokens that represents the weight of that VeriSign certificate, a hypothetical certificate. And when you vote, you get rewards. And the more rewards you accumulate, the more tokens you have.
This Week in Startups is brought to you by Silicon Valley Bank. What's next? What if? Are we ready? Now what? These are the questions that can keep founders up at night. And no one understands this quite like Silicon Valley Bank. For over 35 years, Silicon Valley Bank has helped thousands of high-growth companies by providing scalable financial solutions along with insights and expertise that many other banks just can't. From healthcare to hardware, software to infrastructure, SVB works with companies across the innovation landscape at all stages of the journey, anticipating their needs even before they do. And by providing access to insights and in-depth reports, SVB can help you make more informed decisions and assist in turning your great idea into a great business. Which could be why 50% of US-based, venture-backed tech and life science companies bank with SVB. Learn more at svb.com/twist. Silicon Valley Bank, built for what's next. If an individual wanted to put up one of these servers, they would just go to AWS, install the Solana pack, and then buy a bunch of Solana to then power it. What would it cost them to participate?
Yeah. So usually you don't want to use AWS or cloud providers because AWS has very egregious costs for bandwidth. It's like, 100x more expensive than going to like Hurricane Electric across the bay or whatever.
Got it. So you want to co-locate it somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like the cost of a box at some place, which is global average is $500. Hetzner will do it for 200 or less. So once you're up and running, then you need to go find some stake.
What does it mean to find some stake?
So either you buy a bunch of tokens and you stake yourself, but you need like a big enough chunk to where you're profitable from the operations. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen right now is it's somewhere around $1 million worth of SOL. And that's largely because of the run up in price. When we first started calibrating this, SOL was much, much lower, and you didn't, basically divide that by like a factor of 20 or 100. So it wasn't as like egregious. So part of the issue for Solana is that the way the network works is that when you vote, those votes are transactions. They have to pay fees in the network. And those fees add up because you're voting every 400 milliseconds. So even if it's like 1/1000th of a penny to vote, if you're constantly voting, that costs SOL. So you need to actually have enough SOL to where your proportion of the rewards from the network cover that cost. And some of that is because of that early issue where we're just not as efficiently using bandwidth as we should be by like a factor of 10. So as the software gets better, those costs will drop as well.
Does this, dynamic nature of commerce and, like basically creating a monetary supply or the tokens, however we want to frame those, you have this speculation that can occur. It's decentralized. People can make their bet if they want to bet on any particular cryptocurrency. And then you have the reality of running a network. You probably didn't anticipate you would go 100x this year. So is this now become like a problem in building out your network that it's so expensive to start a server?
Starting a server is cheap, right?
Right.
So
staking a server, I should say.
And again, that staking is cheap in the sense that there's the same number of tokens now as a year ago, minus inflation rewards, right? Those keep adding tokens, but literally the same pool of people, or in a larger pool of people, same pool of tokens exists. So when you start up a validator, there's a community of stake pools and what have you that you can participate and get enough stake, either from those pools or from the foundation if you want to also run a testnet node and stress test. And you can kind of duct tape it together.
So explain how these projects are architected. I know that you raised some money for the company or the project. I actually know some friends who were involved in investing in it. And there was a small venture fund that a couple of my friends were in. I guess that was one of the seed funds in Solana. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say who, but anyway, that did really well. And now they're all swimming in Solana. But when people invested in the company, did they buy tokens? Did they invest in the corporate? Did they do both? And now you have this foundation. How does this all architect itself? Because this is a new concept that's different than venture, correct?
It's like a trial by fire. There wasn't. I wouldn't call it an architecture. It was just the best we could do given the resources we had in a really fast-moving environment. And I think we did pretty well, mostly because of folks like Cosmos, where we followed a lot of the playbook that they set out. So the idea is that you really want a decentralized network, and decentralization really means truly independent operators of the network that can control and run the nodes and maximize the cost to destroy it. Literally, the network dies if I can go and wipe out every copy of the ledger. That's what it means to kill a network. So making that as expensive as possible requires many jurisdictions, many independent providers, many data centers, many humans, right, running these things. And the effective playbook is to do this via foundation. Switzerland is like a nice place to start it because they have
the Zerg.
they have pretty clear laws on digital assets. And you're still constrained by US laws. You still can't just like dump tokens on on US persons. So you still have to go through the, exempt kind of style raises that you do normally for a venture-backed company, mostly dealing with US accredited investors and so forth.
So let's talk about what people are building on top of Solana, because am I correct that this is essentially like an operating system where people can build apps on top of it? And how does that manifest itself? Is this a specific code base? How does one build an application? How sophisticated is that application language if you were to compare it to, say, building, I don't know, a website or building an app on iOS?
So this kind of really speaks to my background. I spent most of my career at Qualcomm. First big project I was on was Brew, which is the first mobile platform OS. So the environment for Solana is you build a ELF executable object, right? That targets Berkeley packet filter, which is a bytecode that's got really high security guarantees, with LLVM, which is a standard compiler toolchain that if you've been coding, you've heard of it. And you can use any front-end language, so C, C++, Rust, and we have a systrus that we built to help you target the thing, and we prefer Rust. So it's kind of like building for an embedded system, and you should think of it as an embedded system because it is one shared giant computer for the entire world. And the world is big, right? So if you don't treat it as an embedded system, it becomes very expensive to be able to host arbitrary applications because you just can't use a lot of arbitrary resources.
Would somebody be able to build an application equivalent to, I'll just give two examples here and we'll walk through it. Let's say Twitter, a basic social network, microblogging platform, or Spotify on Solana currently. And when they did, does that mean when they deploy it, they have zero server costs? They're just deploying to the network, or they're paying, and so when somebody would resolve to run Spotify or to run Twitter, they would be running on the Solana network. Is that the concept here?
So it's deceptive. If I said yes, it's possible, but I'd be lying because what the network is scaling is writes. It's simply scaling writing the state and confirming that these writes happened.
Got it. All the database component.
All the actual hard work in Twitter is on scaling the reads, right? Twitter has like 5,000 tweets per second. We can handle 5,000 transactions per second. Not a big deal. But how do you globally scale 100 million concurrent reads and structure this data? It's the same work that Twitter does.
It's a giant, what do they call those? Non-SQL databases, I guess, that let you pull up pre-constructed lists of your feed. And that is another type of technical challenge. So what we would be saying here in the Twitter example is, yes, your writes to your feed could be handled by the Solana network, but the reads would have to be done in some other place, correct?
Correct.
And then if you did deploy in this fashion, you basically no longer require a database at, AWS or somewhere. You're relying on the Solana network to be your giant database to confirm all of these tweets in this example. But you would still have to figure out a way to have people read it and construct those feeds, which you would do through a normal, whatever, LAMP stack or whatever you used.
Yep, exactly.
And then the people running the network would get paid a fraction of a penny every time you wrote a tweet to the network.
And you could socialize it from like your single application server that kind of takes in the funnel of human tweets and then pays for them, right? And you can send them ads instead. Or you could use a truly self-custody decentralized way where your user expected to have a wallet, they have some SOL in it, and they just automatically pay every time they tweet.
This would be a way to mitigate against spam and deal with identity on these networks, because if you were running a bot farm, you would all of a sudden have a cost to everything you published to the network. And so if Twitter wanted to get rid of spam and bots, if they charged a penny every time you created an account, and it was 1/100th of a penny for your first tweet of the day, 1/10th of a penny for your second, and a penny for your 10th, whatever it is, you could actually model out a de minimis amount of cost, like something people would never even notice, $1 a year maybe, or $1 every 10 years, but it would be enough to kill all the bots, correct?
Correct. That is exactly Sybil resistance, the whole proof of work reason for proof of work to exist is to kill bots.
It's time for another Ourcrowd deal of the week. Right now, you can join Ourcrowd's investment in Orient. According to the deal memo, Orient's software-only indoor GPS is 20 times more accurate and scalable than current solutions. And they've landed contracts with some of the largest retailers of the world. So why join Ourcrowd, you ask? Well, Ourcrowd investors were in early on some of the best performing IPOs of 2019 and 2020, and now you can join them. With Ourcrowd, accredited investors can invest directly, easily, and most importantly, early. Ourcrowd investors have benefited from companies IPOing like Beyond Meat or being bought by companies like Intel, Nike, Microsoft, Oracle, and Uber. So here's your old CTA, the call to action. Ourcrowd's accredited investors have already invested over $1 billion in growing tech companies. If you're an accredited investor, you can join Ourcrowd for free at ourcrowd.com/twist and review the current deals. There is no payment involved until you decide to invest. That's ourcrowd.com/twist to sign up for free. Now, let's take a more robust example like a Spotify, where you have a ton of media that needs to be stored somewhere. How do you think that works in a decentralized environment? Obviously, you could keep the database of all the songs if people want to publish songs, but there's no way to store the files on the Solana network, correct?
Yeah, the files would be somewhat expensive. Solana is really designed for like the metadata layer, the execution, the relationship between tokens, who owns what. And Audius is basically that thing that you're talking about.
Yes, we had them on episode 1273. Yeah. So explain what Audius built on top of Solana and why people are excited about it.
So first of all, it is like this true multi-chain project. The governance token is on Ethereum. It's bridged over to Solana. On Solana, they have smart contracts that track artists and users that follow that artist, and the music likes and music follows and plays, and all this metadata, the relationship between artists and their fans. And I don't know if this is up and running yet, but their goal is to have the audio content to be running on Arweave, which is a persistent storage optimized network. Once you post it on Arweave, it's there forever. So you kind of pay once.
Oh, wow.
And that's kind of like, you can think of it like two decentralized computers, right? One is your disk. One is your I think it's Solana's a GPU.
It's Arweave?
Arweave. Arweave. So we had an explosive launch of NFTs on Solana, partly because Solana built this auction mechanism, everything's on chain, but by default, we had all the content on Arweave. And Sam, the founder, was like staying up at night figuring out how to decentralize and scale their CDN as like people are minting, 10,000 NFTs an hour. So we had quite a fun Web 2 in the trenches. So things are scaling faster than we can keep up experience.
So let's talk about NFTs as well, but I wanted to stop on, you said multi-chain solution. What does it mean to be a multi-chain solution? We understand that means use Ethereum and Solana, but what does it practically mean, and what's the benefit of being multi-chain?
So It's that you're thinking of I think these things are back-end technologies, and they're not the web client. It's not like a single thing with 3 billion users that all have the same virtual machine running locally. So these are back-end systems. And with backends, you can pick and choose whatever you need for whatever solution you want. And the thing that really glues all this stuff together is the cryptography. I can have cryptographic proofs that I own something in Ethereum. I can move that stuff over to Solana through a bridge and vice versa. All this can be automated through cryptography. And the users shouldn't really care at the end of the day where this information is synchronized or managed. And so you can kind of pick the system that you want for the use case that you care about. And that's kind of how I think of the multi-chain world, is that this stuff is complicated, just like a database. There's Pareto efficient trade-offs. And when you end up with Pareto efficient trade-offs, somebody's going to maximize one aspect of it, and somebody else is going to maximize another. So Solana picked a very clear, different Pareto efficient spot than Ethereum or Ethereum 2 or Bitcoin or any of the even competitors like Near, Avalanche, etc.
Which is speed and low transaction cost.
It is. So that is a side effect to the Pareto efficient spot we picked. We picked a single shard, so a single network that fully replicates information as fast as possible. So this again speaks to my 12 years at Qualcomm. How I look at this as uncensorable broadcast radio. How do I make sure that when you transmit a bit, it's propagated everywhere around the world as fast as possible, and that's guaranteed.
What is that going to look like if the adoption, right now you have how many parties and how many transactions occurring that are real transactions a day? Are we talking about billions, millions?
Like 40 million a day. But a lot of that is coming from like a central limit order book called Serum. So market makers, all they do is send cancel orders. Cancel this order.
Got it. So let's say if the network went 1,000x and all of a sudden, we're not 40 million, you're at 400 billion and then 4 trillion. What would the infrastructure need to be in terms of the storage, the bandwidth, et cetera? And, because that's eventually where this is heading, is that these things are going to hit scale. Would that look like, the footprint of Google? Would it look like the footprint of Facebook's data centers, or would it look like something different?
So 1,000x in humans?
1,000x in transactions, maybe to start, or...
So the thing is, like Twitter, right? Let's say we went from our current humans, which is maybe 1 million, monthly active humans, maybe 500,000, to Twitter's 200 million monthly active users. Yeah. We're going from, 30 transactions per second that are human to 5,000. That's not a big deal. But the read infrastructure to support structuring all this data, displaying to them, that's going to have the same footprint as Twitter. There's no magic there. Right. But the chain itself, like the piece that we're working on, that is scalable today to that level easily.
What happened on September 17th? I know you guys had a really rough day. There was a blackout for, 12 hours.
17 hours.
17 hours. Okay.
17-hour block.
Don't want to bring up any PTSD. I know this was just 2 weeks ago. You probably didn't sleep. But, this was this is what happens when you get popular. We all remember at the early days of Twitter, the fail whale. It was like, Twitter had an existential crisis here. Why did you go down? What did you learn from it? And how do you prevent that in the future?
So this was really not the first time we went down. It was kind of the first public one.
The first time people noticed because nobody knew who you were previously.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
So the thing is that what is decentralization? It's in my mind, I think of everything objectively. It's the cost to destroy every copy of the state. So if the network goes down, what it means is that it stopped confirming blocks, but the ledger and the state is still there. So there's multiple reasons why it could stop confirming blocks. Everywhere from every government in the world orders their telecoms to start dropping your data and your kind of host to major AWS went down. And for some reason, you had more than a third of the stake in AWS and you can no longer get to supermajority. A lot of networks are susceptible to this. Or in our case, there was a Radium launch for a product, an IDO. Kind of think of it like a Binance exchange launch or something like this. and there are already bots optimized to try to snipe orders. And they got pretty good at their optimizations, and they flooded the network with about 400,000 at peak requests to make a transaction, not actual transactions in blocks, but they basically flooded it until the network could not handle that load and started running out of memory.
Got it. But so that would be like a denial of service attack or a memory overflow kind of attack, which has been solved in the DNS space, through Dyn and Cloudflare and others. So I assume you figured out some way to, if, I don't know, I say a bad actor, but, if somebody does something outrageous, is it more resilient to the outrageous moments like this? Or edge cases?
So quality of service is not like computer science problem. It's just a pain in the ass problem. And, we test for this. We flood the network all the time. There's just a couple corner cases. So when I git blame that code, it was me who wrote it 2 years ago, where I had a couple unbounded queues that were growing. So can only git blame myself. But this is part of why we still want to call it mainnet beta, is that we have extremely high confidence in safety, right? You only need one of these replicas to survive, one of these replicas to be valid. And the network is already as censorship is decentralized from that physical perspective in my mind as Ethereum 2 or Ethereum. There isn't that significant difference between 1,000 replicas and 5,000 on Ethereum BTC. We're at that, we're like a few more jumps behind, but we're basically pretty much there. But liveness and resilience to arbitrary attack vectors, while guaranteeing low cost, low fees to all the actual users, that's probably will take a couple iterations, and probably will take some iterations from now till we get to 100 million users, right? And then from 100 million users to 1 billion.
Don't you wish you could hire a ringer to help scale out your marketing team? I know you do. Well, with Marketerhire, you can, and you can do it right now. Marketerhire gives you access to expert freelancers on demand with no long-term contracts and no risk. You can hire experienced specialists across the most valuable marketing disciplines, from paid social and search to growth, SEO, content, and even get a fractional CMO. If you don't need a full-time one, maybe a fractional one would work great for you. Again, no long-term contracts. You can cancel at any time. And if it's your first time working with freelance talent, you'll start with a no-risk trial. Only hire what you need and stay on budget with hourly, part-time, or full-time arrangements. Every freelancer on Marketerhire goes through a rigorous vetting process with industry experts. Freelancers from Marketerhire have been hired at over 1,500 companies, including top brands like Netflix, Allbirds, and Lambda School. You're going to get $500 off your first hire at marketerhire.com/twist. Again, Marketer, marketerhire.com/twist, marketerhire.com/twist. Get that $500 right now, and you'll also get a free consultation on who to hire based on your needs and your goals. Again, $500 right now, marketerhire.com/twist. Is the Solana project, it's an open source project, the codebase?
Yep.
How many people contributed to that codebase in September?
In September?
Ballpark.
I'd say maybe 20 people churning through the code.
So there are 20 people. How many of them work for you or the foundation?
I would say vast majority, probably 15.
15 of them. So there's 5 outside contributors. And the reason I ask this is the project's worth $50 billion, which doesn't mean that there's $50 billion sitting somewhere. You sold the tokens when they were worth pennies, I assume.
Yep.
So you were able to raise some amount for your foundation, 100 million, 200 million. What was the initial sale? What did that generate?
Up until the launch, we never had more than 20 months of runway, and our total raises through the years added up to 25 million.
Okay, so you raised 25, but then go ahead.
Yeah, so that was a year and a half ago, and then due to the growth in the ecosystem and kind of the developer adoption, the labs did effectively a raise, but it sold tokens to investors that wanted a chunk of the ecosystem.
Got it.
And that included A16Z, Polychain.
How many tokens were sold in that?
It was to $314 million worth. So pi times 100 million, exactly.
Exactly. So you take the pie, the big pie, and you put that in a foundation. Now the foundation has essentially unlimited resources to pay and hire developers and to stake people who need tokens to put up servers, correct? Is that the concept behind the foundation? Or
no,
what happens to all that money?
Foundation is a separate entity. What it's focusing on is censorship resistance.
Okay.
So it's got a bunch of tokens left over, and it is 100% focusing on bringing on more validators, more physical layer participants. You can think of it like we actually have to build the physical network, otherwise there's nothing there. It's just a bunch of software.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. And then the next time this person floods the network with a bunch of orders, you could go down again. So the 314 million then goes into the company or the labs. And then what do you do with that 314 million? Where does that go?
That is paying for our engineers to do engineering. And that's kind of all over the place because, the kernel itself, that's just a small part, right? Like building out the actual Linux kernel is a very tiny part compared to Android or even Ubuntu, right? Or Red Hat. There's a whole lot of other work that needs to be done at the application level, at the just developer education, like how the hell people even know that they need to do this.
And now these are not shares in the company, to be clear. These are utility tokens people are buying because they want to have access to those tokens, correct?
Correct.
So does that mean when you sell those, as opposed to an investment, when you sell shares, you don't pay tax on it? You have to pay tax on selling those utilities?
Yeah.
So the government gets like some huge tax benefit from you doing this as opposed to you selling shares in the company?
Correct.
Which would be 30, 40% of the proceeds or something?
The U.S. is pretty good at capital, at like taxing corporations. So I think it's like closer to 20 or something.
So this is an interesting point. You look at it and there's a debate. Is it a security? Is it a utility token? You've made your decision. This is a utility token and people are actually using them to do NFTs and this kind of stuff. So you have an up and running network. Seems like it's pretty safe to say. And then, the government's concern, I think, at least here in the United States, is, are people paying their taxes? And here you're writing a big check to the government. You wrote like a 60 or $70 million check as opposed to raising money to just sell shares, correct?
Correct. But, this is just the way that U.S. laws are written, right? We have to comply by every regulation. So even when we do the sale, we're compliant with the way the sale is run as if it is a security. But we still pay the IRS because the IRS doesn't give a shit about.
So you're getting the worst of, wait, hold a second. You're getting the worst of both worlds. You're making sure people are accredited so you're covered.
Correct.
And you know your customer, and you're paying the taxes.
Correct.
You chose to do the worst of both to cover yourself. So you took the most conservative position.
Of course. So what else are you going to do?
So you probably heard Gensler's, sort of discussion about crypto and how he believes people are buying these things for appreciation and that makes them stocks. What do you think the right framework for the United States is? I know you're based in the ZERG, so you have some protections there.
The foundation is in ZERG. Solana Labs, myself, and the labs executives are in the U.S. It's a Delaware C Corp. Okay,
so you're a legitimate American company. So what do you think the right approach is? Because let's face it, the ICOs and all these shitcoins and stuff like that really poisoned the well for real projects like yours, real companies that are playing by the rules, that are doing accredited investors, that are paying their taxes, et cetera. So you're kind of standing on this like mud of all these ICOs and, detritus and all the broken glass. Now you've got to try to rebuild this in a legitimate way. What do you think the SEC and the regulators' approach should be to not stifle this incredible innovation while protecting consumers? What's reasonable in your mind?
What's reasonable, I think, is a lot of forget the person's name who wrote some of the stuff, even on GitHub from the SEC, just creating some safe harbors for a project to be able to go from open source, open built project in those few years to go from nothing to decentralized protocol and having some form of safe harbors there. That's really all that's necessary, I think. Because like reality is that there's some projects that have management and CEOs, and then there's projects that are piece of software, right? So Solana, the protocol and the tokens, it's a piece of software. All the token does is spam resistance. There isn't like a network CEO that makes decisions for which spam to prevent, which not. Right. Right? Like the physical network is run by other parties. It is just a giant piece of code, right? That's it.
Are you concerned that the price went up so dramatically? Would you rather it be at like $10 and, not, at this early stage have grown so quickly? Listen, I'm sure it's great for your personal finances or your investors, but it also is a little bit like, okay, wait a second. Now we got to catch up to this. I mean, 50 billion as a market cap you're basically like Uber or Airbnb or DoorDash now. So, and without the, the scale yet or the customer base.
Well, you got to compare it to like the crypto customer base, right?
Got it.
So if you think of Ethereum with 10 million monthly active users and Solana at 1 million monthly, kind of looking at the...
So each active user is worth $50,000 right now.
In crypto, you would say that.
Wow.
Because it's a different market, right? Like where else have you seen digital marketplace to get to $1 billion in value in 2 months?
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about NFTs, I guess. And those marketplaces.
Right. So like there's opportunities in crypto that are much, much bigger than anywhere else in the world. So
are people taking the NFTs that they forged on Ethereum and then moving them over to Solana because it's cheaper? Is that what's happening?
These are natively minted on Solana.
Natively minted on Solana. And so is the NFT crowd saying it's too expensive on Ethereum? Let's do it on Solana because it's what does it cost to trade $1 million? Let's take one of the crypto punks or something like $1 million NFT. What would it cost to trade the $1 million NFT on Solana versus Ethereum?
The fees to trade, like while Ethereum gas is expensive, like $100, when you're trading $1 million NFT, you don't really care.
Yeah.
The main
on a $10 NFT,
so
now you got a problem.
Yeah. So that is the thing that has blocked entry level artists to really jump into the space. And what we've seen is like on Solana, there's this project called Metaplex that mints, 10,000 SAT for $1.66 worth of Arweave and Sol combined, mostly Arweave to store the images.
Wow.
So like you mint 10,000 NFTs and you sell them and the artist makes like, $100K to $1 million, depending on how successful they are. And that would not have been possible for them as an independent artist that has never seen more than like 30K a year in like their income, right? Wow. To be able to do that on Ethereum.
It is kind of crazy. What at its core, what is happening with NFTs? Is it that there are a bunch of crypto millionaires who this is just a fun pastime? It's like their version of poker or their version of gambling. Or is this actually the art community has now recognized this as the future of art, and that's why these things are getting priced at $200,000 or $1 million? Beeple we understand as an existing artist, but it doesn't really make sense that 10,000.
I don't know.
You don't know. Okay, good. I love that answer. I mean, we're all sitting here trying to figure this out. What is actually happening that people would pay $200,000 for?
Why is Ethereum worth what it's worth? Why is Bitcoin worth $50K?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah.
I
mean, most people would say limited supply and too much money in the world and speculation, and people are speculating and want to hedge, I guess against the dollar or their native currency.
For whatever reason, if Bitcoin is worth $1 trillion, it's some cryptographic system, right, that allows global settlement of $1 trillion worth of funds. Everything that's being built is built on top of that.
Yeah. It is an interesting moment in time. I had Balaji on the All In podcast, and he was talking about, I don't know if you heard the episode 48 with him. He was talking a little bit about using blockchains to store facts and news, and maybe this is some way to, find the truth, etc. Of course, whatever facts are put on the blockchain could be wrong, or, but this idea of permanence and immutability. Is it really immutable and permanent? And what if people put things on a blockchain? Because I could tell you're strongly in favor of stopping censorship. What if people put things on a blockchain that should in fact be censored? Like, I don't know, your phone number or doxing you or, horrible things that shouldn't be shared.
So that read layer, right, is where like that really, there's a bunch of bits somewhere on some hard drive. You connect to a blockchain, you get those bits, and you have to reassemble them into something that humans understand.
Sure.
Right. And then you have to have a domain name that says, hey, I claim that the stuff that I've reassembled is actual USDC, actual dollars. And if you use my service, then I am handling US dollars for you. I'm claiming that like all this stuff is going to work. And this is where that regulation and like local jurisdictional authority, I think, plays. Because this is where you have DNS, you're running a business, you're getting users, you're telling them that this stuff is true. And to me, that's really kind of not that much different than connecting to the internet. If you really think about it, what does the layer one do, especially one like Solana?
So you're okay with the information being on the blockchain, but then you could block the reading of it. So it's there, but not accessible or hard to access.
What's the difference between that and it being on the internet?
Well, if it was on the internet, it has to reside on a server somewhere. The feds can come or whatever legal organization can come and take that server off the internet physically. If it's distributed on thousands of servers, they cannot. If it's on the blockchain, they cannot because they would have to take the whole network down.
So if it's sure, but like there's plenty of places where you can encode it. Like I encode every bit of this bad data in a separate tweet.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the question would be the scale of it. So I guess let me ask it another way. You are always thinking about the edge cases as this master architect, and it's truly impressive what you've built. If somebody were to do a massive leak of everybody's social security number, email, password, phone number, and put it on Solana and on the network and wrote it, and you had 10 million people's, most important information compromised, their password to their bank account, their phone number, et cetera, and it could lead to chaos, what do you do?
Well,
or what will you do? Because at some point this will happen.
Some human has to reassemble that data into something that displays as words and images, right?
Okay.
Right. So that reassembly is you can think of it as the key, right? We could just as easily encode the stuff in some encrypted way, right? With a key that you can go and like acquire because it's a publicly known key, right? Just some silly thing that the data is scrambled on the servers. Doesn't actually mean it's not there, right? Somebody still has to go through the steps reassembling it. And how easy that is really the threshold is this like a fire, or do they just go after that one person that's sharing that information?
But so what if the person said, because we assume that wallets and people being able to access the blockchain is going to get easier and easier, right? It's getting, Twitter will have wallets built into it. Your Facebook account will be a wallet eventually.
So backing that data up on BitTorrent, sharing those like links, torrent links on Pirate Bay. If that data is available there, what does it matter if there's some way to reassemble it from some set of bits on chain?
Fair enough. So since there are other ways to do it currently, this new way of doing it is no more harmful in your mind.
I think that censorship, that actual like government enforcement of go finding these folks and shutting them down, that is the layer that is kind of behind because we don't have a deep understanding of how technology works outside of engineers, like outside of our small niche of people, right? There isn't like a CTO at every like police station or something like that. For sure. I mean, it just is. It's interesting to think about the edge cases, and this stuff will eventually happen. And so, how do we want to defend against it? It's we could like the validators could vote to just go kill that part of the Merkle tree. Yeah, I guess that becomes where it becomes pragmatic, because you might have somebody do something where all the validators or the majority of them say, we really don't want to have this out there. We're going to take it down. And I guess they could vote to do that. Yeah. And reverse it. So this idea that it's immutable maybe
it's immutable unless all the server hosts decide they want it to not be immutable.
But if storing the history, if somebody somewhere is storing that history,
yes,
is it? I mean that.
No, I mean if you take down a copy of the pirated movie, and 1,000 people have downloaded it already, it already exists. So I think it's always interesting. I mean, I don't want to seem like a boomer, but these are things that we have dealt with, like even with Pirate Bay, BitTorrent. Like, yes, it's impossible to stop, but you do have government agencies. So do you worry that government agencies are going to look at this and just take a sledgehammer approach if this kind of stuff starts happening and say, you know what, this is too much trouble. We got to take it down.
They don't come after like AT&T switches for the intermediate data stored in the buffers, right?
No. And they don't. Certainly if people were planning, some sort of horrible attack or trading illegal things over the phone, talking to each other, they would not turn down the AT&T network because of it. And if somebody robs a bank with a Volvo and drives away in the getaway car, they do not blame the Volvo. They blame the criminal. So I think that's largely directionally correct. Yeah.
That's going to be a while, right, for that to propagate, like for that, like a human mental model to get to that level. So, to me, I'm just as uncertain about this stuff as you. I don't know what's going to happen, right?
Well, I mean, it's great to have an informed conversation with somebody who's building the future. And I appreciate you coming on the show to have that open discussion, because we do blame technologies disproportionately for things that occur in the real world. As but one example, when Airbnb came out, everybody said, oh my God, what if a bunch of meth heads go to your house and rent it and destroy it? And it was like, by the way, that's happening in 10,000 hotel rooms at this very moment. There's a meth party in 10,000 hotel rooms and rock stars are destroying and throwing televisions. Like, it's happening in every hotel. It happens every day in probably every hotel. A room gets trashed. Why would Airbnb be any different? The hosts understand they're taking some level of risk for a certain amount of reward, and there's insurance. The end. We're done. But when that happened, you probably remember when that woman had her apartment trashed by a drug party. The first thing Airbnb did was they just gave her $50,000 or $100,000 and she got a brand new apartment. And it was like, okay, sorry for the trauma, but.
So the challenge here is there isn't like anybody to really do that, right? To like yell at or to help you recover.
Yes.
All of like Labs does is it publishes open source code to GitHub.
Yeah.
So the only power we have is just a bunch of words, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And the government has the ability to take measures to find criminals. And so if people are doing criminal things and they're using various tools to do them, the government has other ways to find them. What's the most challenging thing about the job right now for you, Anatoly?
Infinite Zooms.
Just talking to developers on Zooms? Or is it a bunch of investors who are trying to glom on now and get a little bit of the pixie dust of the $50 billion market cap?
I've been able to hand off the investor stuff to underlings.
Well, I mean, you're post needing any funding, right? You're done. You'll never have to fund this project again. And you could always just issue, 1% more tokens. Is that correct? You can't. You'd have to get votes to do that?
Well, like the network.
Or it's a fixed supply.
Yeah. The network has the control over the issuance. We don't. All we do is publish source code to GitHub.
And so that network, if they all voted to to double the amount of supply, the concept there is if they decide to be money printing machine go burr, and they decide to be like the Fed and print up, $1 trillion, or let's just say they try to print $50 billion, they would have to sell it to somebody, right? And how would that work if they voted to issue another billion or 100 million tokens? What would happen?
So those bits, right? All they're doing is synchronizing bits.
Mm-hmm.
If you're, let's say, an exchange, you personally run an exchange, you run a node and you run software that, let's say, Labs publishes open source, but there may be different clients in the future that interprets those bits and continues voting. And you and your exchange that has real users, you tell them that these are SOL. And if you give me dollars through some other rails, I will give you SOL and vice versa. And when you click this button, you can actually get SOL on the network. Right?
Yep.
But you are the one that's actually manifesting those bits into SOL. Not the validators, not anyone else. You're running that node yourself, and you're saying that these bits are actual SOL, and you're the one that's promising that to your customers. Not, right? Like, you're actually like responsible for this, the custody of your node. You're doing it.
Yeah. So people can create their own currencies underneath Solana?
Yeah. So let's say like all the validators like doubled the supply. If you accepted that change, then you're kind of accepting their vote. But if you don't, then you effectively end up running your own fork.
That's really fascinating. So, are there enough developers out there to support these projects? How hard is it to get developers to leave, what's going on out there in the world, in terms of working for Googles and Facebooks and getting paid huge amounts of money? And then how long does it take to train them to contribute to this project? Because it seems incredibly complex. And like there's a small number of people who actually understand this distributed computing plus cryptography. Is this just only available to the top 1 or 2% of developers?
I mean, Google, Facebook level, if those folks can all do it, the challenge is getting them to quit their jobs and convincing them that this is important enough. So our hackathons, we had 13,000 registrations in the Solana Summer Hackathon. This Ignition one had 5,000 registrations, but we think higher quality devs. So people are there to start coding. It takes a weekend to learn Rust if you've had a career in like .NET, Java, C++, or C, or any like modern programming language. It's really a question of like, do you want to be a CEO? Writing the code, the smart contract part, you might not even have to, because there's already enough reference implementations for whatever permutation of lending protocol, DeFi, NFT marketplace that you want to do. Somebody already wrote something that's pretty close to what you want. How do you like convince somebody to go be a founder?
Yeah, it's true. Good luck. I mean, if they know how hard it's going to be, you just basically have to lie to them and just tell them it's going to, there'll be tough days, but you'll get through it.
Yeah.
And if you actually tell them 9 out of 10 days are literally putting your hand on the desk and smacking it with a hammer and, or a brick. And it's basically like, well, here's a brick, and every day flip a coin. And one day, if it's heads, you smack yourself in the head with the brick. And if it's tails, you don't. That's basically what being a founder is. Be careful what you wish for, because it's just a nonstop headache, right? The second you solve some fucking problem, another one pops up. The second you get some great team member, they get 10 offers to go quit the company. Somebody has personal problems. Some technical problem is insurmountable. Whatever problem the smartest people you hire can't solve becomes your problem. That's being the founder.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So that's basically like what we're focusing on. And I feel like everyone else that's not really competing for those people is not focusing on the right thing. So all the hackathons, all the tooling, all of these podcasts, this is me just like trying to find
great
developers. Who are these people that are willing to eat glass?
Exactly. As Billy would say, eat glass and look over the abyss. All right, listen, thanks for coming on the pod. You've been awesome. So candid. You're hiring developers and you want people to contribute to the open source, whichever they prefer?
Yeah. Or just join a hackathon.
Perfect. Where can they find more?
Yeah.
Solana?
Solana.com/ignition.
Okay, great.
Or Solana.com. Yeah, just go check it out. Follow me on Twitter.
Perfect. All right, follow him on Twitter. He's AEYAKOVENKO. Anatoly, I really appreciate you coming on. Continued success with the project, and we'll see you all next time on This Week in Startups. Bye-bye.